When people hear the term serial killer, they don't often think of Japan. Japan is mostly known around the world as the place that houses delicious food, beautiful landscapes, and traditional culture. But there is also a dark side to Japan. Japan has been the home of some bizarre and brutal crimes, including bloody massacres, large-scale poison attacks, and of course, violent serial murders. A lot of these tragedies aren't as widely reported in the Western world as they are in Asia. So here is the story of 11 Japanese serial killers and where they are today. Number 1. Tsutomu Miyazaki. Tsutomu Miyazaki might be the most infamous serial killer in Japanese history, and for good reason. His crimes are the stuff of nightmares, and he single-handedly changed perceptions of otaku culture for the worse. Known as the little girl murderer, as a youngster, he was born with a severe wrist deformity which affected his confidence and his ability to make friends. Although he was born to a wealthy family, his parents were emotionally distant. He grew up as a recluse and suffered various mental health problems. In 1988, he made his first foray into murder. His first victim was a 4-year-old girl who he lured into his car as they drove away into a secluded area. He strangled her and dumped the body. Only a few weeks later, fueled by the desire to feel the same thrill, Miyazaki kidnapped and murdered another little girl with the same modus operandi. As his fantasies grew, his murders progressed in brutality. He killed twice more in the same manner, but with his final victim, he dismembered her in his home and ate parts of her torso. He also took pictures of his victims, defiled their dead bodies, and sent body parts and letters to the grieving families. Miyazaki was finally caught in 1989 when he was discovered naked in his car with his would-be 5th victim. He was sentenced to death and hanged in 2007. Number 2. Takahiro Shiraishi. The crimes of Takahiro Shiraishi have only recently come to light, and this man certainly belongs on the list of the most vicious serial killers in history. Takahiro Shiraishi used modern technology and social media to target his victims. Known as the Twitter killer, Takahiro used Twitter to lure vulnerable and depressed girls to him. Despite having a normal childhood, he distanced himself from his family and began working in the sex industry, luring women into prostitution in Tokyo's red light district. This experience taught him how to manipulate women and gain their confidence, a tactic he later used in his murders. Originally using the site to recruit girls into prostitution, after being caught and arrested, he decided to use the app to instead recruit girls who were sad, depressed, and suicidal. In 2017, Shiraishi used Twitter to find women with suicidal tendencies. Claiming to be a fellow person having suicidal thoughts, he would offer girls advice on how to best kill themselves and offered suicide pacts where they could come to his home and commit the act together. But after they arrived, Shiraishi strangled them, then dismembered their bodies. A family member of one of the victims followed her online trail, leading him to Shiraishi, who went by the moniker Hanging Pro. Killing girls from age 15 to women up to 26 years old, he took their money, killed them, dismembered their bodies, and tried to dispose of them. When the police arrived at his door, he welcomed them in and showed them the boxes of bones, skulls, and even decomposing body parts covered in kitty litter to help diffuse the smell. The police discovered the mutilated bodies of 8 different women and 1 man. Shiraishi's death sentence was finalized in January 2021, and he is currently awaiting execution. Number 3. Yukio Yamaji. Yukio Yamaji had a difficult upbringing, being raised in poverty by his mother after his father died when he was 11 years old. Struggling financially, Yukio also struggled in school and was often quiet with odd bursts of violence or fits of rage. He dropped out after junior high school and started working. He also started seeing a woman much older than him. When his mother didn't approve of the relationship, he beat her with a bat and killed her. With her bloody corpse still on the floor, he invited the girl he was seeing for dinner. Shocked and petrified, she fled and called the police. Due to his age and difficult family situation, he was sent to juvenile detention. He stated that his motivation for murder was his mother's debt and that she'd interfered in his relationships. Obviously suffering from mental illness, he was sent to a mental hospital but was released after 3 years as he was believed to be reformed. Unfortunately, at age 19, with no parents, out on his own, he resorted to working odd jobs, stealing from Japanese slot machine centers and searching for the woman he had been dating before he killed his mother. Unable to find her, he found 2 sisters who lived in the same building block as him. He would later tell police that one of the sisters reminded him of the girl he used to date. Stalking the sisters, finding out which unit they lived in and their schedule, he waited for one and ambushed her. He raped and killed her, and then her sister as well. He then set fire to their home to cover his tracks and left. However, he was soon suspected by the police as he had recently moved into the same building. When interrogated, Yamaji immediately confessed. He also shared the unsettling detail that he was extremely aroused and climaxed while killing both his mother and the sisters. Eventually, he was charged with their murders, but this time the judge wouldn't be as lenient as the first time. Despite undergoing a psychological evaluation that revealed he suffered from Asperger's syndrome, Yamaji received the death penalty in 2009. Number 4. Miyuki Ishikawa. Nothing screams serial killer like having murdered over 100 children. There aren't many women serial killers, but Miyuki Ishikawa was a midwife at a maternity hospital in Kotobuki, where many infants were abandoned due to the poor financial situation of their parents. Ishikawa, frustrated by the lack of resources to look after the abandoned babies, decided to take matters into her own hands. Under her care, many children died of starvation or suffocation due to her neglect. She even tried to get money from the parents for the murders, claiming that the price for their death is less than what it would have cost to raise them. In 1948, police discovered the bodies of 5 infants, and their autopsies concluded that they hadn't died of natural causes. An investigation pointed to Ishikawa and her accomplices, her husband and another doctor, and the 3 were arrested. The exact number of babies which Ishikawa murdered is unknown, but police discovered over 40 bodies in the office of a local mortician and another 30 in a nearby temple, 2 places Ishikawa used as dumping grounds. Strangely, Ishikawa was only sentenced to 8 years in prison, as authorities considered the homicides as crimes by omission rather than intentional. After an appeal, the sentence was reduced to only 4 years. After she got released, Miyuki Ishikawa became active in real estate. On May 30th, 1987, she died at the age of 90. Number 5. Futoshi Matsunaga. Futoshi Matsunaga can be considered one of the more recent Japanese serial killers, as most of his crimes happened in the late 90s. The exact number of his victims is unknown, as no remains were ever found. However, Matsunaga is infamous for being a particularly disturbed killer, as he would kidnap multiple victims at a time and force them to torture each other. Matsunaga's first victim was a man who he initially tried to blackmail, but then abducted him and his daughter and held them in his apartment. Matsunaga electrocuted the man and forced him to eat his own feces. After he died, he convinced the daughter that it was she who had murdered him. Matsunaga was aided by his accomplice, Junko Ogata, who was also his mistress. Although Ogata helped Matsunaga in committing the crimes, he was abusive and manipulative towards her. Matsunaga's other victims were 5 members of Ogata's family, who had been living with Matsunaga and Ogata at the time. Matsunaga bound them and held them captive, then gradually killed them one by one, even coercing a 10-year-old girl to hold down her mother while her father strangled her. Once all 5 were dead, Matsunaga chopped up their bodies, boiled, then discarded them. Everything came to an end in March 2002 when Matsunaga's final kidnapped victim escaped and contacted the police. They arrested the pair, and although Matsunaga claimed he was innocent, Junko confessed to everything. This led to a conviction for both of them, a life sentence for Ogata, and a death sentence for Matsunaga. Ogata is currently still serving her sentence, while Matsunaga awaits his execution. Number 6. Seisaku Nakamura. Seisaku Nakamura, known as the Hamamatsu Death Killer, was one of Japan's youngest serial murderers and was responsible for the stabbings of 9 people. Born in 1924, Nakamura was born deaf, but he was a highly intelligent child. although from a young age he displayed psychopathic tendencies, such as a lack of compassion or empathy. This behavior, along with the cold treatment he received from his family, contributed to him turning violent and committing murders at a very early age. His first victims were two women who Nakamura tried to rape, but ended up killing as they resisted his advances. In 1941, at age 17, he recklessly assaulted two women in a geisha store, killing one of them. Only 2 days later, Nakamura impulsively stabbed 3 more people in a restaurant, fatally wounding all of them. Soon after, he directed his anger towards his family. During a heated argument, Nakamura stabbed his brother to death and seriously injured 5 other members of the household, including his parents and his nephews. However, the victims never informed the police who the perpetrator was, for fear of retaliation from the disturbed teenager. Nakamura's final victims were another family whom he followed home in August the same year. He killed both parents and 2 of their children, but the oldest daughter survived and was able to later identify Nakamura. He was apprehended after a few months, and due to pressure from the public, he was quickly tried and convicted shortly after. He was executed at age 19. Number 7. Kiyoshi Okubo. Born in 1935, Kiyoshi Okubo was a Japanese serial killer who went on to rape and murder 8 women. Okubo was a quarter Russian from his mother's side and often found himself teased at school because of his ethnic features. Although he came from a large family with 8 children, Okubo was still showered with affection, especially by his mother, who had a hard time enforcing any discipline on him. Due to the lack of authority in his family, he began to rebel at school, disrespecting teachers but also his female colleagues. Okubo showed disturbing behavior from a young age, and when he was around 11 years old, he sexually assaulted a young girl by forcing stones up her genitals. A few years later, he attempted his first rape, but was caught and imprisoned for 4 years. In 1961, Okubo married a woman who was unaware of his criminal record and had 2 children with her, but he continued to be on the lookout for more rape victims. In 1971, he transitioned to murder and killed 8 women over a span of 2 months, all of whom were strangled. Only a few days after his murders finished, Okubo was caught and confessed everything. He tried to blame his acts on his treatment received while in prison from his previous crimes, claiming it made him want to rebel against authority. He was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging in 1973. Number 8. Genzo Kurita. Genzo Kurita was one of Japan's first serial killers and was active after World War II when Japan was still recovering from the war and reforming. In a time of poverty, crime, and instability, Genzo was a bully who took advantage of the weak and preyed on the innocent. His murder spree lasted 4 years, from 1948 to 1952, during which he claimed the lives of 8 people. As a young adult, Kurita started to have problems with the law and was arrested a couple of times for burglary and assault. In 1948, Kurita committed his first murder, killing one of the girls he was dating at the time, as she continually pressured him to get married. Later, he went on and killed another one of his girlfriends. Kurita was not convicted for his first murders, so after a few years in 1951, he regained his confidence and killed again. This time, it was a young woman in Koyama who he murdered and raped right next to her sleeping baby, who he left unharmed. Shortly after, his deadly desires took over again, leading him to rape and kill a 29-year-old woman who he threw off a cliff. More brutally, Kurita also threw her 3 young children along with her. Fortunately, the eldest daughter survived the incident. Kurita's final murders were committed in January 1952 when he killed an elderly woman and her young niece. Once again, he raped her corpse, but this time he left fingerprints at the scene, which police quickly identified, and he was arrested only a few days later. Kurita received the death sentence, which he appealed, but due to his unstable mental condition, he retracted the appeal and he was executed in 1959. Number 9. Akira Nishiguchi. Akira Nishiguchi was born in Osaka in 1925 and began his criminal career as a fraudster before turning his hand to serial murder. Nishiguchi found himself on Japan's most wanted list after murdering 2 men that he first defrauded. While the police worked tirelessly to catch him, he went into hiding in a hotel in Hamamatsu for 5 days following his first killings. There, he killed the owner of the establishment along with her mother. After vacating the hotel, he went to murder an elderly gentleman working as a lawyer in Tokyo. The police's efforts to catch Nishiguchi paid off when an 11-year-old girl recognized him and informed the authorities. He was caught and sentenced to death by hanging. He died on the 11th of December 1970 at the age of 45. Number 10. Masumi Hayashi, the Curry Killer. Masumi Hayashi was a 37-year-old woman with 4 children who lived with her husband in a small town in Wakayama Prefecture, Japan. A former insurance agent, she had some run-ins with the law when she and her husband, who was an exterminator, were caught in some insurance fraud. She also wasn't very much liked in her neighborhood, as she was distant, had the biggest house, the most expensive car, and seemed to turn her nose up at her neighbors. In small towns where women in the neighborhood are tightly knit and take part in many community events, Masumi might have felt the outcast. Rather than try to be nice or altogether ignore the locals, instead, she decided to poison the inhabitants of the town during a festival. In 1998, she laced a pot of curry with arsenic, which was sold at the festival, and ended up poisoning 67 people. Of those, 2 adults and 2 children were killed. For this, Hayashi received the death penalty, which she has unsuccessfully appealed several times. Currently, therefore, she is still awaiting her execution. Number 11. Kayotaka Katsuta. Kayotaka Katsuta, a firefighter from Kyoto, was a serial killer who killed up to 22 people, though he was only charged with 8 murders throughout the 70s and 80s. Although he was the son of a farmer, in his youth he was always getting in trouble for various things, such as theft of handbags, stealing cars, and vandalizing public property. Despite his criminal history, he was able to get into the firefighter program and worked his way until he was quite high up in the ranks of the firefighting service in his town. But his new career was not enough to keep him busy, as he was living a luxurious life with jewelry, cars, and expensive housing, as well as a mistress on the side. To keep his wealth, he would target hostesses. Hostesses are young women who work at hostess clubs and serve drinks to rich businessmen. They drink and flirt and get paid lots of money to entertain men. Kayotaka would follow these women after they left work and sexually assault, rob, and kill them. He even attacked a police officer and stole his gun, which he would use to kill his future victims. It would be years before eventually the law caught up with him. Katsuta was executed at the Nagoya Detention House on November 30th, 2000.